The reluctant keeper. The lights dimmed automatically as Corporal Marcus Hayes approached the secured wing of Outpost Helios. Unlike the bustling main corridors with their constant hum of conversation and activity, this section maintained an eerie silence. His footsteps echoed against metal flooring, the sound bouncing between sterile walls as he pushed the hovering food cart forward. 6 months into his assignment, and he still felt his heartbeat quicken each time he made this journey. Not from fear, not exactly, but from something he couldn't quite name. Anticipation, perhaps. Or dread. The two had become difficult to distinguish. At the final checkpoint, the scanner hummed over his body, confirming his identity. Lieutenant Warner, stationed at the security console, barely looked up. "Feeding time at the zoo again, Hayes." Warner's voice carried the same tired humor it always did. "Still don't understand why you volunteered for this duty." Marcus offered a noncommittal shrug. "Better than waste disposal. Besides, the hazard pay helps." Warner snorted. "No amount of money would get me to be alone with that thing." "That thing." The phrase grated against Marcus's ears, though he kept his expression neutral. The door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing the observation chamber beyond, a stark space dominated by the massive transparent barrier separating them from Outpost Helios's most valuable prisoner. Inside the containment area sat Vexera, motionless as always. The alien's skin was a deep indigo, almost black in the chamber's dim lighting, with bioluminescent patterns flowing beneath the surface like liquid starlight. Tall and willowy even when seated, Vexera's 6-fingered hands rested upon crossed legs, spine perfectly straight, for eyes, too large, too small, closed in what appeared to be meditation. Military intelligence classified Vexera as a Sentinel-class threat. The last survivor of a species called the Tiernali, captured during the Battle of Epsilon Ridge after reportedly disabling 3 human battlecruisers using only telepathic abilities. So the official story went, anyway. For a supposedly dangerous psychic weapon, Vexera spent most days in this exact position, still, silent, refusing food half the time. Marcus positioned the cart beside the transfer slot. "Meal delivery," he announced, though he'd long ago stopped expecting a response. He pressed his palm against the biometric scanner, allowing the small hatch to open. Inside the meal compartment sat today's offering, the same processed nutrient paste they'd been serving for weeks, designed specifically for Vexera's unusual biology. Marcus had snuck in something different today, though, a small portion of fresh fruit from hydroponics. Against regulations, but nobody checked the contents once the slot was sealed. "Weather control says we might get actual rain in the biodome tomorrow," Marcus said conversationally as he slid the tray through. "First time since they fixed the atmospheric processors." No response. Not that he expected one. Vexera hadn't spoken a single word in the 3 months since being transferred to Outpost Helios. According to the files, the alien had gone silent shortly after capture, refusing to communicate except through the occasional telepathic scan that left researchers with splitting headaches and nosebleeds. Marcus should have left immediately, as protocol dictated. Instead, he lingered, watching as one set of Vexera's eyes opened, the smaller pair first, then the larger, all 4 irises the color of burnished copper, vertical pupils dilating slightly in the light. "I know you understand me," Marcus said quietly. "And I think you know I'm not like the others." For a moment, he thought he saw something flicker across the alien's face, a minute shift in those otherwise impassive features. Then Vexera's gaze dropped to the tray, noticing the addition. When the alien reached for the fruit instead of the standard paste, Marcus felt an absurd rush of satisfaction. A small victory, but after weeks of one-sided conversations, he'd take it. The emergency klaxon shattered the moment, its shrill wail piercing through the chamber. Red warning lights began to pulse overhead as the station's AI announced, "Alert, primary power failure detected. Emergency protocols engaged. All personnel return to designated safety zones." Marcus cursed under his breath. Power failures weren't uncommon on aging frontier outposts like Helios, but they were never good news, especially not in high-security areas with atmospherically controlled environments. The lights flickered once, twice, then plunged the chamber into darkness. Only the bioluminescent patterns on Vexera's skin remained visible, casting an ethereal blue glow that outlined the alien silhouette against the blackness. "Stand by," Marcus called out, activating his wrist light. Emergency power should kick in momentarily. But when the backup generators hummed to life seconds later, only minimal systems restored. The observation room's lights remained dim, and worse, the environmental controls for the containment chamber began to falter. Marcus's eyes widened as he saw the atmospheric readout on the wall panel. Oxygen levels inside Vexera's chamber were dropping rapidly. The isolation system was failing, defaulting to a vacuum state, standard procedure to prevent contamination in case of breach, but fatal to any living being trapped inside. "Shit," he muttered, fingers flying across the emergency control panel. "System override, authorization haze, 7729, Delta. Access denied" flashed across the screen in angry red letters. "Come on," he growled, trying again with his secondary clearance codes. Nothing. Through the barrier, he could see Vexera rising to full height, nearly 7 feet tall, those luminous markings pulsing more rapidly now. The alien wasn't panicking, but those 4 eyes were fixed on him with undisguised intensity. Marcus made a split-second decision. He sprinted to the maintenance panel, pried it open with trembling fingers, and began manually cross-wiring the emergency protocols. It was against every regulation in the book, the kind of action that ended careers or worse. "I'm trying," he said, though he wasn't sure if Vexera could hear him through the barrier. "Just hold on." The alien's chest was rising and falling more quickly now, struggling for air as the oxygen continued to deplete. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead as he worked, bypassing safety measures, overriding lockdown protocols that would have sealed the chamber completely. With a final connection, the panel sparked beneath his fingers. The environmental systems reset with an audible hum, and the readout showed oxygen levels beginning to stabilize. He'd done it. Marcus sagged against the wall, relief washing through him. When he looked up, Vexera stood directly before the barrier, closer than the alien had ever positioned itself before, those 4 eyes studying him with unmistakable intensity. Then something extraordinary happened. The alien raised one 6-fingered hand and pressed it flat against the transparent barrier. Marcus hesitated only briefly before stepping forward and placing his own palm against the other side. A perfect mirror, separated by inches of supposedly impenetrable material. "You're welcome," he said softly. The alien's head tilted slightly, those copper eyes never leaving his face. Then, for the first time since arriving at Outpost Helios, Vexera spoke. The voice was melodic yet rough from disuse, the words carefully formed as if each required tremendous effort. "Why, help." Just 2 words, but they hit Marcus with physical force. He'd known the alien could speak, of course, the files confirmed as much, but hearing that voice directly was something else entirely. "Because it was right," Marcus answered simply. "And because nobody deserves to suffocate alone in a box." Vexera's secondary eyes narrowed slightly. "Even enemy?" Marcus shook his head. "I'm not convinced you are one." The moment stretched between them, unbroken until the main light suddenly flooded back on, making both of them blink. In the distance, Marcus could hear the sound of approaching footsteps, security personnel, no doubt, coming to check on their precious asset. Vexera withdrew its hand and took 2 graceful steps backward, resuming a neutral stance. But those eyes remained locked with Marcus's, something unspoken passing between them. "I'll be back tomorrow," Marcus promised quietly, just before the door slid open behind him. Lieutenant Warner burst in with 2 armed guards. "Hayes. Report status." "Environmental system glitched during the power failure," Marcus replied smoothly, stepping away from the barrier. "I stabilized it. The prisoner is secure." Warner eyed him suspiciously, then glanced toward Vexera, who had once again assumed the familiar cross-legged position of indifference. "You're not authorized to override environmental controls," Warner said. "Would you prefer I let our most valuable research subject suffocate?" Marcus countered. "I made a judgment call, sir." After a tense moment, Warner nodded curtly. "File your incident report by 0800 hours. You're dismissed, Corporal." As Marcus turned to leave, he felt it, the faintest brush against his consciousness, like cool fingers skimming the surface of water. Not invasive or painful, as the reports had described Vexera's telepathic contact, but gentle. Curious. A single concept formed in his mind, not in words but in understanding, gratitude. Marcus didn't look back as he exited the chamber, but his steps were lighter than they had been in months. The alien, Vexera, had spoken. Had reached out. And tomorrow, for the first time since he'd taken this assignment, Marcus Hayes would have genuine purpose when he returned. Behind him, watching his departure with all four eyes, Vexera's bioluminescent patterns pulsed in a rhythm that, had anyone been studying closely, might have resembled a human heartbeat. Beyond words. The morning briefing was unusually tense. Marcus sat at the back of the room, watching as Colonel Reeves paced before the assembled staff, his weathered face set in harsh lines. "The incident last night is unacceptable," Reeves barked. 3 separate system failures in a containment zone housing a Class 4 telepathic entity. "I want answers, not excuses." Technical Sergeant Patel cleared her throat. "Sir, preliminary diagnostics suggest it was a cascade failure in the power distribution nodes. The backup systems should have functioned perfectly," Reeves cut in. "Unless they were tampered with." His gaze swept across the room, lingering momentarily on Marcus before moving on. Something cold settled in Marcus's stomach. He kept his expression neutral, but his mind raced. Had the colonel seen the altered wiring? The logs would show his emergency override, but not the manual bypass he'd performed. "Effective immediately, all interaction with the subject will be limited to essential personnel only," Reeves continued. "And I'm ordering a full security review of all containment protocols." As the briefing dissolved into technical discussions, Marcus found himself cornered by Dr. Natalia Varnin, the station's lead xenobiologist. Her perpetually tired eyes studied him with uncomfortable intensity. "Corporal Hayes," she said quietly. "A word?" They moved to a quiet corner of the corridor, where Varnin activated a small privacy field, standard issue for sensitive conversations. "I reviewed the logs," she said without preamble. "Oxygen levels dropped to critical before stabilizing. The subject should have shown signs of respiratory distress, yet my morning assessment shows normal vital functions." Her eyes narrowed. What really happened in that room? Marcus hesitated. Varnin wasn't military, she was a civilian contractor whose interest in Vexera seemed genuinely scientific rather than strategic. Still, trust was a luxury on Outpost Helios. "The system failed," he said carefully. "I performed an emergency override." "And the subject? Did it communicate with you?" The question hung between them. Marcus maintained eye contact. "No more than usual." Varnin's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You know, Corporal, I've been studying Tierney physiology for months. Fascinating species, evolved on a world with minimal verbal communication. Their telepathic abilities aren't weapons as military intelligence claims. They're adaptations, like our vocal cords." She glanced around before continuing more quietly. "The tests they're running. They're not just studying Vexera. They're trying to weaponize those abilities." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're the only one Vexera might actually communicate with." Her gaze was steady. "And because something's happening tomorrow that you should know about." That afternoon, Marcus brought not only the standard meal but also a datapad containing old Earth novels, Hemingway, Shelley, Morrison, loaded onto a secure, network-isolated device. Another violation, but one he hoped might offer Vexera some mental stimulation beyond the bare walls of captivity. When he entered the observation chamber, he found Vexera standing rather than sitting, those luminescent patterns flowing more rapidly beneath indigo skin. "I brought something different today," Marcus said, placing both the food tray and the datapad into the transfer slot. Vexera approached as the items emerged on the other side, for eyes studying the offerings with evident curiosity. The alien's movements were fluid, almost hypnotic in their grace. "Books," Marcus explained. "Stories from my world. I thought you might be bored." Vexera picked up the datapad, long fingers tracing its surface with delicate precision. Then those copper eyes lifted to meet his. "Why risk?" The alien's voice was clearer today, the words more defined, though still carrying that melodic resonance that seemed almost musical. Marcus glanced toward the camera in the corner of the room, disabled during his maintenance check earlier that morning. The recording would show only static for the next 20 minutes. "I learned something today," he said quietly. "About why you're really here." Vexera's head tilted slightly, secondary eyes narrowing. "You know nothing." "I know they're planning to transport you to Black Site 7 tomorrow," Marcus replied. "For invasive neurological testing." The alien went perfectly still, those bioluminescent patterns suddenly dimming. "Death would be preferable." The bluntness of the statement struck Marcus like a physical blow. "They told everyone you disabled 3 battlecruisers telepathically. That you're a weapon." Vexera's upper hands formed a complex gesture, something cultural, perhaps, that Marcus couldn't interpret. "I was a pathfinder," the alien said slowly. "Not warrior. We bridge minds. Help species understand each other. The ships attacked our research vessel. I connected their minds to ours so they would understand we meant no harm. And it incapacitated them," Marcus realized. Human minds reject connection. Too much fear. Too much isolation. Vexera's patterns pulsed dimly. "They felt everything my people felt as they died. Our terror. Our confusion. It overwhelmed them." Marcus absorbed this in silence. If true, it meant Vexera wasn't a weapon but a translator of sorts, a diplomatic bridge whose abilities had backfired catastrophically when deployed defensively. "Why tell me this?" "Because you asked why," Vexera replied simply. "No one else has." The alien moved closer to the barrier, those 4 eyes studying Marcus with penetrating intensity. "You bring fruit. Books. Questions. You see person, not specimen." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "The transport leaves at 0600. 6 guards, 2 scientists. They'll sedate you first." Vexera's patterns dimmed further. "Then I die tomorrow." "No," Marcus heard himself say. "You don't." The storage bay was deserted at 0430, as expected during third shift. Marcus moved efficiently, gathering the supplies he'd carefully requisitioned over the past 18 hours, emergency rations, a portable atmospheric converter, basic medical supplies, and a small but critical collection of access cards he'd cloned during his maintenance rounds. His service record would be irreparably damaged after today. 18 years of exemplary conduct, vanished in a single act. If caught, he faced court-martial, imprisonment, possibly worse, given the classified nature of Vexera's captivity. Yet as he prepared, Marcus felt strangely calm. For years he'd followed orders, maintained systems, enforced regulations. He'd become as mechanical as the outpost itself, functioning but hollow. Until he'd met someone who saw through that machinery to the person beneath. The sedative he'd added to the night shift's coffee would be taking effect about now. Not enough to harm anyone, just enough to slow response times and induce drowsiness, easily attributable to the late hour. The security rotation had been adjusted accordingly, creating a 7-minute window when the containment corridor would be monitored solely by automated systems. Systems that, thanks to his earlier modifications, would experience convenient diagnostic errors requiring manual restart. At precisely 0442, Marcus slipped into the observation chamber for the last time. Vexera stood waiting, as if sensing his approach, those copper eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Ready?" Marcus asked, activating the emergency override he'd programmed into the barrier controls. The transparent walls separating them slid open with a soft hiss, the first time they'd stood in the same space without barriers between them. Vexera seemed even more imposing up close, towering nearly a foot above Marcus, those luminescent patterns casting gentle blue light across both their faces. "The others?" Vexera asked. "Sleeping or distracted," Marcus replied, handing over the environment suit he'd modified for the alien's unusual physiology. "We have 6 minutes to reach the maintenance shaft. From there, we can access the auxiliary hangar." As Vexera donned the suit, those 6-fingered hands moved with surprising dexterity. The alien paused, studying Marcus with an unreadable expression. "Why betray your kind for mine?" The question hung between them, simple yet profound. Marcus thought of Colonel Reeves' cold calculations, of endless wars fought against others, of humanity's persistent fear of difference. Then he thought of fruit freely offered, of a 6-fingered hand pressed against glass, seeking connection. "I'm not betraying my kind," he answered finally. "I'm just remembering what it means to be human." Something shifted in Vexera's expression, the closest thing to a smile the alien's features could manage. "Come," Marcus said, checking his timepiece. "We need to move." The maintenance shaft was narrow and poorly lit, but it provided direct access to the lower levels without passing security checkpoints. As they descended, the station's alarms suddenly blared to life. "They've discovered you're missing," Marcus said grimly, quickening his pace. "Faster now." They emerged into a service corridor, Marcus leading with his sidearm drawn. The auxiliary hangar was just ahead, home to 3 small atmospheric shuttles used for surface reconnaissance. "Hayes." The voice stopped him cold. Lieutenant Warner stood at the far end of the corridor, weapon raised. "Step away from the asset, Corporal." "That's an order." Marcus didn't lower his weapon. "It's not an asset, Lieutenant. Vexera is a person, a diplomatic envoy whose ship we attacked. The military knows this. They've been lying to all of us." Warner's expression flickered with uncertainty. "You've been compromised." "It's the telepathy." "No," Marcus interrupted. "It's clarity. For the first time in years." He gestured toward the hangar door. "We're leaving. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Warner's finger tensed on the trigger. "I can't let you do that." What happened next occurred so quickly Marcus barely processed it. Vexera stepped forward, copper eyes locking with Warner's. The lieutenant froze, his expression shifting from determination to confusion, then to something like wonder. His weapon lowered slowly. What are you showing him?" Marcus whispered. "Truth," Vexera replied softly. "His truth. His forgotten kindness." Warner blinked rapidly, tears forming in his eyes. When he spoke, his voice cracked. "Go. Northeast quadrant has minimal patrol coverage. I'll say you overpowered me." Marcus nodded once, gratitude too complex for words passing between them. As they slipped past, Warner turned away, deliberately avoiding witnessing their access code entry. Inside the hangar, Marcus worked quickly, prepping the smallest shuttle while Vexera watched the entrance. The alien's luminescent patterns had intensified, pulsing with what Marcus now recognized as anxiety. "Have you ever considered," Vexera said suddenly, "what happens after this?" Marcus paused his preparations. "There's an uncharted moon in the Ceresian belt. No military presence, small trader settlement. They don't ask questions. And you? Your life here ends today." The reality of what he was doing finally struck Marcus fully. Everything he knew, his career, his future, his world, abandoned in a single moment of decision. "Some endings are worth it," he replied, returning to the launch sequence. The shuttle's engines hummed to life just as the hangar door began to cycle open. Through the viewport, Marcus could see armed security personnel taking position, Colonel Reeves among them. "Hold on," Marcus warned, engaging thrusters. The shuttle lifted off, emergency protocols automatically opening the atmospheric barrier as they accelerated toward the starry darkness beyond. Behind them, outpost Helios grew smaller, its lights diminishing until it was merely another pinprick against the vastness of space. In the co-pilot's seat, Vexera's patterns had calmed to a gentle, steady pulse. The alien's 4 eyes studied the stars with what Marcus could only interpret as wonder. "In my culture," Vexera said quietly, "one who saves another becomes responsible for that life." Marcus set the course for the Ceresian belt before turning to face the alien. "And in mine, responsibility is something we choose, not something forced upon us." He offered his hand, a human gesture of agreement. "I choose this." After a moment's hesitation, Vexera's 6-fingered hand enveloped his, cool to the touch but surprisingly gentle. As their hands clasped, Marcus felt that same feather-light brush against his consciousness, not invasion but invitation. A glimpse of perspective beyond human understanding, vast and complex and beautiful. "A beginning," Vexera said, copper eyes reflecting the distant stars. Marcus nodded, a smile finding its way to his face for the first time in longer than he could remember. A beginning. The shuttle continued its journey into the darkness, carrying with it not a captor and prisoner, but 2 beings who had found in each other something neither expected, recognition beyond words, understanding beyond species, and the quiet, revolutionary act of seeing each other as they truly were. Retriclaude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. 3, 7 Sonnet.